This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, starts the show by discussing the shortage of attorneys in rural and agriculture communities and how they are working to help change that. Keeping today's show rolling is K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster with reminders for producers as they are doing tank mixes. The show concludes with K-State's Brad White, Dustin Pendell, Phillip Lancaster, and Bob Larson with another segment of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast. Pendell quizzes the others on a recent report from the USDA about using cover crops in livestock production. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking about shortage of rural attorneys with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Shelby. My pleasure.
Roger, as we're talking about this shortage of rural attorneys, why is this something that's really significant?
Well, Shelby, if you look at all the counties nationwide, there's about 40% of all of the counties that have fewer than one attorney per 1,000 residents in that county. National average is about 4, but that shows us that we've got a problem not just in the plains and the western part of the country, but across the country. You could go to upstate New York, for example, and there's a rural attorney shortage there, just like we face it in Kansas, for example. We have 4 counties in the state of Kansas that don't have a single attorney that resides in that particular county, and that story gets repeated throughout the plains and throughout the west. And so it's a real problem, but it seems to be centered primarily in the center part of the country and further west. The ability of farmers and ranchers to find competent legal counsel to help them address their unique issues is very, very difficult.
And so thinking about not just any attorneys, specifically attorneys that know about agriculture and some of the tax stuff that goes along with it?
That's right. Agricultural law, as I've said for a number of years, is basically, in many instances, law by the exception. And what I mean by that is that the Congress has legislated rules, basically back from our founding. This is something that Thomas Jefferson was very focused on, and that is that rules should be different for those that produce the food and fiber for our people. And the Congress has legislated a different set of rules with respect to many areas of the law than rules that apply to non-farmers. And so we have to have attorneys that are specifically trained in those unique legal issues to properly represent farmers and ranchers. So it's not possible just to put law students that have graduated past the bar and get them into a rural area. They have to be specifically trained in those legal issues, or they could end up doing more harm than good.
And really, they can have also more of an impact than just practicing law in that community?
That's right. When you end up in a rural community, and I speak from over 30 years of experience with this, you end up being kind of a very important person in that community. You end up, in many instances, being a legal counsel for the local school board, various types of groups that are in that community. You're a figure in your local church, for example. People look up to you, and they admire you for being not only an attorney, but a counselor for them on a lot of issues. And you're kind of a big fish in a small pond, and you're not just a peg in a hole, as you can end up with being with a big firm in a large city and just kind of get lost. And there are a lot of misconceptions and misperceptions that we have to disabuse our students from, and that is that you have to go to the big city to be successful. No, you can be successful in a small town. The saying is probably heard it, bloom where you're planted. And you can bloom pretty large in a small rural community. And the feeling of being very significant person in helping people and helping farm families see their legacies continue in their families is very rewarding. And working with farmers and ranchers is a very rewarding aspect of the practice. And I hope that our students who end up in rural communities find that out, and I'm sure that they will.
And Roger, as you have spent a lot of time in agriculture and rural parts of our country, what are a few key things that you really see from people who can thrive in those areas?
Well, I think, and this is what I try to emphasize to not only my undergraduate students at K-State that take the agricultural law class, but particularly the law students that I have that are interested in working in rural communities. So I have a unique subset of the overall student body here, and that is, I try to emphasize them, if you can master tax, estate planning, business planning, real estate issues, that's going to be your bread and butter with respect to a rural practice. That's going to be, particularly the tax end of things, that'll be continual business for you year after year after year. And then you fit in the other issues that clients have, such as fences and leases and water issues. Those come periodically, but your bread and butter is always going to be your tax, your estate planning, your business structures, entity creation, all of that. That is the core of a rural practice. And then you fit the other legal issues that your farm clients and your ranch clients have around those issues.
When we introduce you, we always introduce you as a K-State and Washburn law professor. And so how do you see that transition of people from going to K-State to Washburn or other universities?
Well, particularly at the undergraduate level at K-State, I've had a number of students over the years, quite a few, that have gone on to law school and then are in practice. And a good chunk of those are out in the rural areas. So they've gone all the way through. But my undergraduate course is not designed to train them to be lawyers. It's to help them identify what the legal issues are that they will face once they graduate, and many of them want to get back into production agriculture or work in agribusiness. It exposes them to how the law intersects with agriculture in general, and some of those catch the fire and they catch the inspiration that then they do go on to law school, and I've had a number do that and also end up in government positions, maybe working with a Kansas senator or representative in D.C., and then go on into policy situations that are important to agriculture. So you don't have to be a practicing lawyer to have an impact in a rural community, but some have gone on to be in that practice. But at the undergraduate level at K-State, we're concerned about identifying issues, and it really opens up their eyes to how much, probably unfortunately, the law intersects with the daily life of a farmer or rancher.
How might people then, if they're interested in practicing law in rural communities, what could that process potentially look like for them?
Well, there are a number of unique opportunities that they have. If they're interested in coming to Washburn, we have a whole program that's devoted to rural practice. And if they come here, we're working on what's known as a 3+3 partnership with K-State, and we hope to get that completed soon, where they can seamlessly transition to Washburn Law to complete their legal education, earning their bachelor's degree at K-State and then a law degree in 6 years instead of 7 years. And if they were to come here, they could focus their studies in agricultural legal issues. We have a number of courses that they can take over their 3-year experience. Plus, we have rural practice organizations, we have ag law student organizations, we have a rural externship program where they can, after their first year, for between their first and second year and their second and third year in those summers, they can extern with a law firm in a rural community and have a stipend that covers their expenses and get credit for it. And that is funded by a grant from the Dean Hansen Foundation. And that's been very successful over the years. We have approximately 15 to 20 students that take advantage of that every summer. And then the hope is that they will end up with those firms after they graduate and pass the bar exam. So that helps them get involved in those local communities that then we hope after they finish their legal education, they end up in those communities. So it's an introduction to that. And we've had a lot of good reports come back from students about that.
Is there anything that our rural communities or farmers and ranchers could be doing to maybe help encourage or show the opportunities available to people in their rural communities?
That's a good question, and I think the way to answer that is, as a farmer or rancher, if you've got a young student or someone that's working with you on the farm that shows an interest in this, just show them on a daily basis how often you interact with and intersect with legal issues. Maybe you've got a contract issue. Maybe you've got aerial application of pesticides. You hire somebody to come and apply pesticides, and there's a problem that results. You've got a lease issue. You've got issues with your tenant. You've got a fence issue that you've got to deal with. And then, of course, every day you're making decisions as to when are you going to market your crops, when are you going to buy livestock, when are you going to sell your livestock, when are you going to buy your inputs. And that is, a lot of it's driven by tax considerations. And then when are you going to buy machinery and equipment, and are you going to depreciate them or not? Those are all tax-related issues. And then, of course, the overall structure of your business. What's the best way for you to be structured to transition your business to the next generation, to protect your legacy, or to minimize tax all at the same time? What about your estate plan? Whole host of issues that are out there. And it's really an exciting area of the law. It's very dynamic. It's always changing. There's always something going on. I never lack for anything to write about or talk about, haven't in the past 32 years, and it's changing every day. And it is an exciting area of practice if you want to exclusively practice or get into that area of it too. But I'd say just having a farmer or rancher point out to a younger person that might show an interest in this, how often it is in their daily business that they do intersect with legal issues.
If someone is interested in finding out more information about this path of practicing law, how could they find out more information?
Well, I would encourage anyone that's interested to contact me either by email or through my website, or contact K-State, Department of Ag Econ. They can get in touch with me there too. And then I can get you in touch with directors of our programs here in agricultural law at Washburn, as well as the pre-law advisor at K-State.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Much appreciated.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. I will link some resources in today's show notes on agtoday.net if you'd like to find out more information about this. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about tank mixing. And to talk about it, we're joined by K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. Sarah, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for the invitation, Shelby.
Sarah, why is talking about tank mixing important to do?
So tank mixing is one of those questions that we'll get kind of a sporadic question or two or three almost every single year. The unfortunate thing about those questions, Shelby, is that usually they're coming after the fact. So somebody has a mess and then they're trying to figure out, like, how do I fix this, or what did I do wrong?
And so, Sarah, as we're thinking about mixing things in a tank and not wanting to screw things up, how do people figure out what that order is, and why is that order important?
Well, one of the, archives of Sarah's bumper stickers is read the label, right? The label is the law. You hear a lot of folks kind of trot that phrase out. But really, from a tank mixing instructions perspective, that really is the best place to look, because those companies have probably messed it up themselves when the product was in development, or they've worked with folks like myself who messed it up. A lot of times, Shelby, in our research plots, one of the things that we get asked to take notes on is problems with the mix. So, sometimes as you're looking at different treatments, we can find some of those things in a 2-liter bottle, rather than a 1,000-gallon spray tank, which is usually an advantage for folks. So the label is the best place to look. Now, the caveat to that, Shelby, is you're putting in 2, 3, 4 different products. Sometimes those labels are not in agreement with each other on what the best tank mix is. Now, that's when things start to get a little bit tricky. So then you have to kind of pros and cons, or I think, one of the better things to do is talk to an agronomist or a weed scientist that who maybe has sprayed that mix before, and figure out if they've messed it up and if you can learn from that mistake.
Are there a few key things that really producers should make sure they don't do when it comes to mixing?
I think the biggest kind of rules of thumb, Shelby, I'll spin this to a little bit of a positive instead of a don't do. I think the biggest rule of thumb is just to remember that herbicides have to get wet in order to be sprayed, right? And so the general rule of thumb is to start mixing with the products that are the hardest to get into solution. So those are going to be our dry types of products, right? And a lot of times we talk about, and if you read the labels, they'll talk about making a pre-slurry or whatever. So you don't just dump the dry product into your tank. You actually dump a solution of the dry product that's already mixed with some water into the tank. I think that is probably the number one rule of thumb to remember. I think another good rule of thumb to remember is that by and large, any of your like crop oils and things of that nature, they're going to go in last. Okay. I think those are the two biggest things to kind of keep in mind. Now, that being said, sometimes we'll have adjuvants or surfactants that need to go in earlier, right? One that comes up a lot in that kind of conversation is ammonium sulfate or AMS, right? So a lot of times we're using AMS as a water conditioner. This is like, I'm a Roundup baby, right? I kind of joke about that a lot. That's when I was in college, was in the Roundup days. And so we talked about the importance of putting AMS in the tank first, because then that's going to tie up all those hard water cations and make your Roundup work better. That's great for Roundup, but sometimes we don't have to add it in first, and it's good to check the labels, because there are a few labels that will recommend actually putting it in a slightly later in the mixing order.
Are there signs where you can see maybe the mixture is going a little bit awry or not where you want it to be?
Sometimes though, you'll put the product in and like the damage is done, right? Because if you think about, how we're loading sprayers, a lot of our products are going in through inductors, either on a spray trailer or on the sprayer itself. And so we're just, pushing the button or turning the valve, and in goes the product. And the next thing you know, right, the worst case scenario is when you've gone to the field and tried to spray it, and then it's all through all of your screens and nozzles and everything, right? That's the oops that really cost you some time. I think there are some things we can do, though, aside from reading the label, Shelby, and I think some of those would include making sure you have plenty of water. Okay, so that would be one thing to do to prevent an oops, is make sure you have plenty of water for the products that you're spraying. Another thing to do would be to don't rush that process of agitation. Sometimes, we get in a hurry, we push the program, and if we don't give enough time for the first product to get completely mixed before we put the second product in, that's when we can have some problems as well. Other things, if we think about like products that you can almost guarantee you're going to have problems with, if you're in a situation where, this would be mostly for like I think like a wheat top dress type of application, or maybe early spring burn down, when you want to use UAN or some sort of liquid nitrogen as part of your carrier for your spray volume. There are certain herbicide formulations that don't play well with that nitrogen fertilizer. So just being aware of what you've got.
In an unfortunate case, if we do have that oops, what do you do with it afterwards?
So obviously cleaning the spray tank becomes an issue. The kind of rule for getting rid of extra mix is that it has to be applied onto a field that would be a labeled application. So you're looking at trying to get it out of the sprayer near a field where it would be normally applied. Certainly we need to make a statement here about, taking care not to mix and load near drinking water sources and those kinds of things, right? So take good care from that perspective. But I think, one thing to make sure of is it's got to go through the system, right? So you're going to end up like cleaning your tank, right? So tank cleaner, the whole 9 yards, and making sure all of the screens, every place are clear and the nozzles are clear, and things of that nature. Other things you could do, so you've got a mess, hindsight's 2020. If you're spraying something that you have not sprayed before in terms of a combination, do a jar test. So a jar test basically means go get a mason jar, right? And put whatever your water source is in that mason jar. And then there's a little bit of maths involved here. You need to figure out the ratio of the different products that would be in your spray tank. So if you've got a 1,000-gallon spray tank and you're going down to a quart, you've got to kind of back calculate there to figure out how much product to add. But make that mix, let it set for 30 minutes or so. I'd way rather see things settling out of my spray tank or gelling up in that mason jar, right, than in my big sprayer. So that's one thing folks can do. Another thing that, I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of field experience with is compatibility agents. Pretty much every adjuvant company has a compatibility agent of some sort. And so sometimes that can help reverse something that hasn't gone too far bad. And it can also help to prevent some of those mistakes. So those are some things that folks can think about, to maybe remedy the situation.
And as we're thinking about mixing things, wanting to put out a reminder that taking care of your personal safety is important through all of this.
That's right. A lot of times when I'm talking to folks who are really kind of nervous about herbicide use, Shelby, I use the analogy of, growing up on a farm, my dad had bulls and cows, right? And there was always one bull that he was like, kids, you got to keep your eyes on that one, right? I sort of think of herbicides like that bull, right? Like we need them. They're useful. And by and large, if we handle them correctly, they're not going to mess with us. And so that's where, just making sure gloves, long sleeves is a good rule of thumb, because our skin is sometimes it's a really good barrier. But if you have cuts or anything like that, obviously that's a fast entry point for herbicides to get places we don't want them to be. So,
Sarah, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us thoughts around tank mixing.
Thanks for the opportunity, Shelby.
That was K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Kansas Livestock Association's Scarlett Maydinger, as she says who this year's recipient of the Don L. Good Impact Award is.
Dale Allen, a retired Kansas State University Department of Animal Sciences and Industry professor and meat industry visionary, along with his wife Joyce, will receive the award named in honor of former ASI department head Don Good during the K-State ASI Family and Friends Reunion October 5th in Manhattan. Allen grew up on his family's farm in Liberty and earned his bachelor's degree from K-State in 1961. He received his master's in animal breeding from the University of Idaho and his doctorate in animal husbandry from Michigan State University. Allen was a member of the K-State ASI faculty for 22 years, beginning in 1966. His research focused primarily on beef composition and beef quality. He also coached the meat judging team for 13 years, served as a student advisor, and was an advisor for the Block and Bridle Club and Alpha Gamma Rho fraternity. Allen left his academic position in 1988 to work for Excel Corporation, which became Cargill Meat Solutions. He retired in 2004, then consulted in various capacities for the next 12 years. Allen is a past president of the Livestock and Meat Industry Council. He was the 2009 K-State ASI Distinguished Alumnus, 2013 Stockman of the Year, and one of the first to be inducted into the Meat Industry Hall of Fame. More information about the ASI Family and Friends Reunion will be available online at ksubeef.org. I'm Scarlett Maydinger.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead.
You're tuned into Agriculture Today. I'm Jacob Cloughton for Shelby Varner, and we end today's show with Brad White, Dustin Pendell, Phillip Lancaster, and Bob Larson from the Beef Cattle Institute.
Dustin, I know you had some questions for us on cover crops.
So yes, the USDA Economic Research Service just come out with a report titled Cover Crops on Livestock Operations, Potential for the Expansion in the U.S. So this is hot off the press. But in this report, it's obviously all about cover crops and livestock. But what they found, just a quick summary, and then we'll get into some questions, is that most studies find that integrated livestock cover crop systems tend to be more profitable than livestock systems without cover crops. This profitability of the cover crops is primarily relies on the choice of the cover crops, what species, and the management of it. They found the amount that's being harvested or by the livestock, being consumed by livestock, but then also the agronomic effects. So think, the soils, the carbon sequestered, stuff like that. They also indicated that that these systems vary with thinking about this fixed costs of grazing, harvesting, the size of the farming operations, the experience that producers have in this, and then also the regionality. So think East Coast, West Coast, Southern, North, various regions. So a lot of things have an impact on the profitability. Here's my first question for you. Can you tell me what % of cattle operations this would include dairies as well, have cover crops, of the cattle operations have cover crops?
I'm going to say it's still relatively small, so I'm going to say 10%.
I'm going to go a little bit higher. I'm going to say, a lot of them, they're going to be integrated crop and livestock systems probably. So I'm going to say probably around 30%.
19%.
So this was using the 2017 census, but it's 14%.
Okay. Well, that's actually kind of encouraging.
Now, within that, if you break it out into cow-calf versus dairy, what percent do you think cow-calf versus dairy?
The percent of that 14?
Of that 14, yeah.
So I'm going to go 75%. Maybe
I'm going to go 75.
Dairy.
I'm going to go 80% dairy.
Yeah, I'm going the other way. I'm going high percentage dairy.
Well, it's of the cattle operations that have cover crops, 11% are cow-calf.
Oh, okay.
Dairy are 33%.
Oh, and stocker.
And yeah, stockers, yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Didn't think about stock.
One last question here. Let's talk regionality for a second. So cow-calf only. What region has the highest percentage of that will use cover crops on their operation?
I'm going to say the Midwest. So like Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, that area.
I'm going to go a little farther west. I'm going to say Nebraska, South Dakota, that area maybe.
Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas.
So it's what they refer to as the Northern Great Plains, which would be what Bob said, and it's 33%.
Okay.
Can you tell me what the least or the smallest percent? What region?
I would think west because of the water.
Yeah, southwest.
Yeah, it's going to go southeast.
There are two regions that are both at 3%. One, they call it the Basin Range, which is basically the Rocky Mountains, which makes sense. And the other one is called the Mississippi Portal, which would be just either side of the Mississippi in Louisiana, Arkansas, up to about Tennessee.
Just because they've got so much grasses there and rainfall. Either a lot of rainfall or
no rainfall. Yeah.
So that was a quick rundown of the report. There's a lot more research that needs to be done. They were just gleaning some stuff from an old census, but I don't know, really good information I think out there.
Yeah, well, I think there's some good opportunities, and that cover crops have really evolved over even the last few years, but for sure over the last decade with use. And you see more and more people using those not just as their farming operation, but actually intentionally planning on grazing and having some land that's set aside to kind of change with the seasons.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more and more of that. I think there's a real opportunity. Some of the producers that I talk to, you're at the mercy of the rain, so you put the cover crop in. I need some moisture to get it to go. But that can be inexpensive, good, extend the grazing season, and it has the benefits on the crop side of the operation too. So in a good integrated system, it can be pretty reasonable.
And there's a lot of cow-calf operations that have a farming operation on the side, which is probably why you see some of that. So already got a lot of equipment
on the side,
or the cattle are on the side of the farming operation, depending on which way it goes. But learn about what makes sense in your region, because there are some different cover crops across regions that make sense.
That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.